We were just two sisters, and during my elder sister Rashmi's wedding, I was only 16 years old. There was a significant age gap between us, but she was my only sister. During her wedding, I cried so much that I was inconsolable. My brother-in-law comforted me during the farewell and lovingly held my hand, saying, "Mahi, why are you crying? A sister-in-law is like half the lady of the house, so you're welcome to visit us whenever you want." Hearing this, I felt happy. My sister moved to another city after her marriage, and my brother-in-law said, "Whenever you visit your sister, I'll personally take you around the city." My sister left after the wedding, but the desire to visit her house and enjoy myself remained in my heart. A year passed since my sister's wedding, but I couldn't visit her city. She came to visit us after a whole year, along with Rajiv, my brother-in-law. He was very kind and spoke lovingly. During their stay with us, he would always be around, taking care of me, and even brought many gifts for me. I didn't have a brother, so I developed a bond with him. After spending a week with us, my sister and brother-in-law returned to their home. 2 months later, my sister called again. She shared the happy news that she was pregnant. Hearing this, my parents and I were overjoyed. After a long time, such joyous news had come to our home, but my sister was very troubled. She was telling Mom that she couldn't stay alone in another city in her condition because she was experiencing severe nausea and dizziness, and the doctor had advised her to rest. Hearing this, Mom became very worried too. My elder sister was the apple of Mom's eye. Mom suggested that she come and stay with us, but my sister said Rajiv wasn't ready to leave her alone, and the doctor had advised against long-distance travel. Besides, it wasn't just a matter of 1 or 2 months. There were still 9 months to go. Hearing this, Mom said, "Don't worry, I'll send Mahi to stay with you. Her presence will keep you company, and she can help with the household chores." My sister was delighted to hear this and said, "Don't send Mahi alone. I've asked Rajiv to come and pick her up." I had been waiting for such an opportunity for a long time, and had prayed for it countless times. So, I happily packed my bags right away. The joy of becoming an aunt is unparalleled. 3 days later, my brother-in-law arrived to pick me up, and I went with him to my sister's place in another city. At my sister's in-laws' house, there were only her father-in-law and my brother-in-law, so I didn't think I'd have any trouble staying there. There were no complications. My sister was thrilled to see me and had already prepared my favorite dishes. She gave me the room right in front of hers to stay in. When I went to greet my sister's father-in-law in his room, his behavior seemed strange. He was a bedridden, sick man and started saying odd things to me, which I couldn't understand. My sister held my hand and led me out of the room, explaining that her father-in-law had been unwell for many years and often spoke incoherently. She told me not to go into his room again. Her father-in-law hadn't even attended her wedding. Rajiv's match with my sister had been arranged by a friend of my father's. This was my first meeting with her father-in-law, and to be honest, I was quite scared of him. 3 days had passed since I arrived at my sister's house, and I hadn't gone back to her father-in-law's room. My brother-in-law was taking great care of me. Because my sister wasn't feeling well, she spent most of her time resting in bed. I had taken over all the household chores. But then, one day, something happened that made my hair stand on end. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen and went to my room. I decided to take a shower before going to bed, because it was swelteringly hot, and I was drenched in sweat. I went to the bathroom in my room to take a bath, but after a few moments, I felt as though someone was watching me. At first, I thought it might be my sister, but suddenly, my eyes fell on the ventilator, and I was horrified. There was a shadow there, and I was certain that someone was secretly watching me. This realization left me utterly shaken. I quickly put on my clothes and ran out of the room. When I reached my sister's room, I found her and my brother-in-law lying together comfortably. In my haste, I had forgotten to close the door behind me, and now seeing them together made me feel embarrassed. My brother-in-law sat up and said, "Come in, Mahi. Why are you standing at the door?" I didn't know what to do or how to tell them that I had felt someone's presence at the ventilator. I made up an excuse and said I had come to ask my sister about milk. My sister said, "Go and rest. Whatever else needs to be done, I'll ask Rajiv to take care of it." As I was heading back to my room, I saw my sister's father-in-law returning to his room. He looked at me strangely and said, "You are very beautiful and innocent. Take care of yourself and don't blindly trust anyone." His words angered me. I couldn't believe he would say something like that to me. Frightened, I quickly went back to my room and spent the whole night wide awake. My sister had said that her father-in-law was bedridden and never left his room. So what was he doing outside so late at night? It was very strange and made me uneasy. I kept thinking about whether what I had seen at the ventilator was my imagination or reality. Was someone really watching me? Could it have been my sister's father-in-law? This question kept bothering me, and I spent the entire night restless. The next morning, as my brother-in-law was leaving for the office, he said, "Mahi, I'll come home early in the evening and take you shopping. Be ready." While saying this, he suddenly came closer and touched my cheek before leaving. His gesture startled me. My sister, standing behind, said, "Rajiv cares about you a lot. You should also try to take care of him since I'm unable to do so these days. He gets very tired." Hearing this, I replied, "Don't worry, I'll take care of Rajiv." In the evening, I got ready, and Rajiv took me shopping. He bought more for me than he had ever bought for my sister. I was happy, but I knew this happiness would be short-lived. That night, the power suddenly went out. Out of nowhere, someone pushed me hard, and I was terrified. I wasn't expecting it at all. As the figure moved away, I ran out of the room. It was pitch dark, and I couldn't see anything, but I managed to reach my sister's room by feeling along the walls. I called out to her, and she said, "Mahi, don't worry. Rajiv has just gone to check the power. The electricity often cuts out in our area. He'll fix it soon." My sister turned on the flashlight on her phone. I didn't even have a phone and sat beside her, crying. A little while later, the power came back on. She laughed and said, "You're so silly, getting scared of a little darkness. How will you take care of me?" I replied, "It's not that. Someone was in my room, which is why I got scared." Hearing this, she laughed loudly and said, "Rajiv was with me in my room, and my father-in-law doesn't leave his room. You were just spooked because of the darkness. It's nothing else." I didn't know how to convince her that someone had been in my room. But who could it have been? If my brother-in-law was with my sister, then who was in my room? The shadow at the ventilator, and now the feeling of someone's presence in my room, had terrified me. I kept thinking about my sister's father-in-law. When my brother-in-law returned after fixing the power, he looked at me and said, "See? I told you she would get scared of the dark. You should have stayed with her." My sister replied, "It was very dark indeed." I told them, "Don't worry, I'm fine," and went back to my room to sleep. I didn't want to trouble my sister further, because Mom had specifically told me not to stress her out, as her doctor had advised against it. I nervously returned to my room, locked the door, and lay down on the bed. Sleep was out of the question. I was thinking of finding some excuse to go back home. Whatever was happening, I was now certain it wasn't my imagination. Someone was taking full advantage of my vulnerability. The next day, my brother-in-law returned home from the office briefly in the afternoon for some work. At that time, my sister was in her room, fast asleep after taking her medicine, and I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Rajiv came into the kitchen and suddenly grabbed me from behind, holding me tightly in his arms. I had never expected such behavior from him. I tried to free myself from his grip in a panic, but my voice seemed stuck in my throat, and I couldn't say anything. Instead of letting me go, Rajiv held me even tighter and said, "You're so beautiful that I can't take my eyes off you." Somehow, I managed to free myself and ran out of the kitchen. As I was rushing away, Rajiv said, "You looked gorgeous while showering too. I have a video of you on my phone." Hearing these words, I felt my breath stop. I couldn't believe he could be so vile. With tears in my eyes, I looked at him, but he casually said, "I just want to talk about love and affection." As soon as he took a step toward me, I ran to my room and locked the door behind me. I was trembling with fear. The face of Rajiv I had seen today was one I had never seen before. I had always seen him as a brother, but he turned out to be a threat to my dignity. I couldn't even tell when or how he had started looking at me this way. I hadn't noticed it at all. Rajiv left soon after, since he had come home only briefly from the office. I decided then and there that I wouldn't stay here for another moment. In the evening, when my sister came to my room after waking up, my eyes were swollen from crying. She was worried and asked me what was wrong and why I was crying so much. I hid the truth from her because her condition was such that I couldn't tell her something so big about Rajiv. Through my tears, I simply said that I missed Mom and Dad a lot and wanted to go back home. Hearing this, my sister hugged me and said, "You've cried so much over such a small thing. Don't worry, I'll send you home with Rajiv this evening." The thought of traveling to another city alone with him sent shivers down my spine. I told my sister that Dad would come to pick me up and that I would go back with him. My sister said, "All right, that's even better. I'll get to meet Dad too." Hearing my sister's words, I felt relieved. As soon as she left my side and went to her room, I suddenly heard a loud scream. I immediately ran toward her room, and what I saw left me in shock. My sister was lying near the bed, clutching her stomach and crying out in pain. I helped her up and laid her on the bed, sitting beside her for a long time. She didn't seem well at all. I suggested taking her to the doctor, but she firmly refused and held my hand, saying, "Mahi, don't leave me. I can't stay alone in this condition. Today you were here to help me, to pick me up and take care of me. But what will happen if something like this happens again after you leave? My baby and I might not survive." Hearing this, I became extremely worried. Reluctantly, I decided to stay for a few more days and reassured her, "Don't worry, I'm here with you." My words brought her immense relief, and she hugged me tightly. Rajiv also returned home by then. My sister told him about her fall and how her condition had worsened. Hearing this, Rajiv became concerned and told me, "Go and get some milk for your sister." I was in the kitchen preparing milk when Rajiv came into the kitchen again and started forcing himself on me. I pushed Rajiv away angrily and said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Your wife's health is in such a terrible condition, and here you are behaving like this with your sister-in-law." My words had no effect on him, and he continued to try to force himself on me. I started screaming loudly, and hearing my voice, my sister came in. I was so frightened that, without considering her health, I told her the entire truth about Rajiv. My sister looked at me once and then at Rajiv. To my shock, she said to him, "What kind of a man are you that you can't even control a 17-year-old girl? She's been manipulating you for the past week, and you still haven't been able to do anything." Hearing this, the ground beneath my feet seemed to slip away. Stunned, I asked my sister, "What are you saying?" A strange smile appeared on her face as she took my hand and led me to her room. I stared at her in disbelief. She made me sit down, gently ran her fingers through my hair, and said, "Listen to me carefully, Mahi. I know everything about Rajiv, but whatever Rajiv wants from you, you will have to do it." I stood up angrily and said to my sister, "What kind of things are you saying? Do you even know what your husband wants to do with me? He wants to use me. He wants to do wrong to me. How can you live with a man like this, who, even after you are pregnant, has his eyes on your sister? How can such a person give you and your child a good life?" Hearing my words, my sister replied, "You will have to do everything Rajiv wants from you, otherwise he will never be able to become a father." Shocked, I responded, "What are you talking about? You're pregnant, and he is going to be a father." My sister said, "No, I cannot become a mother. When we found out, we called you here so that you could help us have a child. Rajiv doesn't want to adopt someone else's child. He wants his own. For that, this is the easiest way. I don't want to bring another woman into his life and make her my rival, so I decided to sacrifice you for this purpose. After all, you're not my real sister. I love Rajiv deeply, and I won't lose him at any cost. That's why I want you to get pregnant and fill the void of a child in our life. Until now, I thought my brother-in-law was my enemy, but my sister was equally involved in this dirty game. To save her marriage, my sister had gambled away my life." I folded my hands in front of my sister and pleaded with her to send me back home, but she refused to listen. Instead, under the cover of darkness, she forced me into her husband's room. I had no way to escape because my sister had threatened me, saying that if I didn't comply with her wishes, Rajiv would force himself on me, and they would blame it on some imaginary lover of mine. I would never be able to prove my innocence to our parents. I never imagined that my sister would treat me this way. I knew she wasn't my biological sister, but I had always treated her like one. I never thought such a divide would come between us. When she tried to drag me into the room, I resisted and started shouting for help. Hearing the commotion, her father-in-law came out of his room. He immediately intervened, pulling me away from my sister, and warned both her and Rajiv that if they tried to harm me, he would call the police. Rajiv, furious, started misbehaving with his father, but his father stood firm and refused to leave me alone. He fought with his son for my sake and took me to his room for safety. He told me, "Daughter, I had suspected their intentions from the very beginning. If I had said anything against your sister earlier, you might not have believed me. But now that you've seen their true nature, you must understand that these two are no longer human, but monsters. Perhaps I failed somewhere in raising my son, which is why we're seeing this day." Using his phone, I called my father and told him everything. The next morning, my father came to take me home. He severed all ties with my sister permanently. He was heartbroken, feeling that he must have failed somewhere in his upbringing, even though he had never treated his stepdaughter any differently from his biological one. Yet she had repaid his love and care with betrayal. As for me, I couldn't stop thinking about how Rajiv's father had heard my cries and saved me. It had been years since this incident, and we have no relationship with my sister anymore. But one thing I learned from this ordeal is that my mother made a grave mistake by sending me to live at my sister's house, and I made a terrible error by trusting a strange man. What my sister did to me was unforgivable, but such things happen in today's world. This is why it's crucial to protect your dignity and not place blind trust in anyone. Some relationships exist only to fulfill their selfish motives. They care about nothing else but their own interests.